morning, everybody, and welcome to Shift. If this is your first time here, you can scan this QR code or the one back at the welcome table. And if you fill out the Connect card, we'll send you some free Opus coffee. And make sure you check out the Coffee with Joe section, and Joe will meet you for some coffee, obviously. And you can ask any and all questions and get to know Shift. Thank you to everyone who donated, shopped, helped hand out all those 102 meals yesterday. It was such a lovely morning, helping serve our community and love on people. And you know what? I think one of the really cool things is that there are tons of people all over the city who have never been in Shift, but would notice if Shift closed its doors. That's beautiful. Mark your calendars for our next online-only service. It's gonna be Thanksgiving weekend, November 26th. Week 4 of Won't You Be My Neighbor will go live on YouTube at 10:30 a.m. Whether you're traveling back or getting over all that turkey and pumpkin pie, we want you to enjoy your weekend with your friends and family. Next month is our final series of the year, and we've got some special stuff planned, okay? We've got a guest speaker on the 10th, an amazing Christmas encore that you're gonna wanna stay for, and an actual traditional Christmas Eve service on the 24th. We'll also have our ugly Christmas sweater shirt day then. So I guess not totally traditional, more like Shift traditional. The last Sunday will be our annual Sabbath Sunday. So no teaching, no service, just rest. Take time to give thanks, to look back and set your intentions for the next year. That's all that I have for you guys today. So let's kick off week 3 of Won't You Be My Neighbor with How Do I Love?
How is everybody today? How was everybody's weekend?
Wonderful.
Anything happen? We were just kind of like hanging out and chilling.
M-I-Z.
Ooh, Z-O-U. Hey, listen.
Gators.
They can go home.
Yes.
I'm not going to keep these on. Relax, my pants are underneath them. Listen, we're not your typical church, okay? But I'm not going to do that. Hey, for real though, it was such a fun game, and the Gators played so good. I thought that backup quarterback, I don't know what year Mertz is, but that backup quarterback was fantastic. They played great. And now that Mizzou squeaked it out, we can go back to being friends again, and I can cheer for the Gators. And they don't play next year, so you don't have to put up with that ever again, maybe, for a while. Anyway, 2 weeks ago, we kicked off Won't You Be My Neighbor by looking at defining who neighbor is. And Jesus telling the story of the Good Samaritan, kind of exploding that definition out to mean everybody. And last week we dove into the main story of the series, the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, and we answered the question, who do we love, right? And we saw I'm sorry, I got that flip-flop. 2 weeks ago we kicked it off by looking at how we love ourselves, right? And really exploring the idea of like, how can we love others as ourselves if we never truly learn to love ourselves? And then we looked at the main story and exploring that definition out, who our neighbor is. And so today we're moving on and we're going to answer the question, how do I love? Now don't forget that the guideline, our guide to what love is, we have found in Romans 13:10. Can you show that? It says, love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. So if we're asking the question, how do I love? And we know that love does no harm, then we can safely assume that how I love someone doesn't harm them, right? It also means that I may have to alter my view of God. The New Testament letter of 1 John says that God is love. Like, really think about that God is love. So that means that love is God, right? And if God is love, and love does no harm, then God can't do harm, which means that I can't do harm. So the religious leaders were able to walk right by suffering because of their belief about who God was. right? So if our beliefs about God allow us to participate or ignore the suffering of others, then our theology is wrong, right? Now, in our main story in Luke chapter 10, Jesus is responding to a question that was given to him by a religious expert. The religious expert was trying to justify himself and defining who neighbor is, not so that he could love others better, but so that he knew who he could and didn't, or basically who he had to and didn't have to love, right? And Jesus answers the question with the story of the Good Samaritan and asks a question of his own. And we're just going to do a quick run through as a reminder in verse 30. Jesus replied with the story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and left him half dead by the side of the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same." So in this story, like, Jesus explicitly answers the question of who is our neighbor, right? Everybody. The beaten man and the Samaritan, they weren't neighbors of proximity. They weren't neighbors of commonality. They were neighbors because of a shared humanity. So Jesus not only gives us the definition of who our neighbor is, but also tells us how to love our neighbors, right? Now, what we're getting ready to talk about, I'm going to be really honest, it's not earth-shattering, okay? This probably is something that you've heard before. It's incredibly simple. Notice that I didn't say easy, okay? But it is simple. But I think that if we take an extra moment, that we will find great depth and beauty within the simple teaching of Jesus, right? So look at verse 33 again. I've got it there for you. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him. The first thing that we have to think about when we ask the question of how do I love is to see. We have to see. Simple, right? But not easy. Because there is so much to see. Every day we are bombarded with images and reels and TikToks and shorts, and so many of them are just showing these unspeakable tragedies. And the news is constantly yelling at us from our screens that everybody is trying to murder everybody else and that the world is on the brink of disaster. And you know, next year being 2024, going into another election cycle, it's going to get even worse. Humans are not meant to know all the things all the time, right? We do not have the emotional margin or capacity to take in so much. So I'm going to suggest that you narrow your focus. I'm not saying that you ignore people that are outside that narrowed focus, but if we don't do that, we'll never see anyone. To see others, we have to be intentional. Like, we have to slow down. Seeing isn't something that we're going to do haphazardly, and that's what I mean when I say to narrow your focus. It's not about ignoring people, it's about slowing down and taking the time to intentionally see the people around you. Some of you might remember a shorter, older gentleman by the name of Larry Miller. He passed away last year. I knew Larry for a good 10 years. And if you met him and you happened to be a woman, he would inevitably tell you how pretty you were. And I had that conversation with him a few times about, like, hey, people don't like that dude. Like, I don't know. But he genuinely thought it was like this big compliment. I could never get through to him. But he was harmless. Larry was harmless. But truthfully, Larry was hard to love. He wasn't self-centered. Because he would literally, and I saw him do this, like, to his own detriment. Like, he would give his last dime to help somebody. I'll say that he was unique, all right? He was unique. But at times it was really hard to be his friend. And there were many times that I didn't want to be his friend. And that's when my wife, who does a good job of this, she would always remind me to just like actually see Larry. And when I would stop in those moments to actually see the person, I realized that Larry acted out of a lifetime of abandonment, a lifetime of trauma, and a lifetime out of regrets. Larry always made the safe choice. Whatever the situation was, he picked the safer option. He never, in his entire life, took a single risk. He never bet on himself. Many times when we would sit, his stories were, I wish I would have. I wish I would have. I wish I would have done this. He desperately wanted to be loved and to love others. And seeing Larry allowed me to love him better because I was able to see past some of those hard parts of Larry and then to actually see him as a person. And in seeing him, I could love him. Our first step in how we love others is to see. But it doesn't stop there. Look at what the Samaritan does after seeing the beaten man. Can you show that? Yeah. And when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. So our second step in how we love people is to feel. We have to feel. He saw the beaten man, and in seeing, he felt. Right? Like he could have just walked by like the religious leaders did, but he didn't. He allowed himself to feel compassion or splagnitsomai. Nobody? Oh my gosh. Splagnitsomai, my absolute favorite word. It's that visceral gut reaction that occurs when you stop to see. It causes you to get out of your seat and do something about it. It's the reason compassion is the reason why people give. It's why people will volunteer, why people will protest. It's why people will give up so much in response to seeing suffering and injustice and bigotry. Now, if you listen to our podcast, Shift Happens, and if you don't, what is wrong with you? You will hear story after story after story, and in every single one of those stories, they all share something. They all share pain. And that pain is caused by the church, and it's caused by Christians. You'll hear the story of Brent Roberts, our very first guest, and he was also the very first member of of Shift's initial board of directors. You'll hear how when he realized as a 16-year-old that he was gay, how he drove himself hours away from his parents' home, parents not knowing, so that he could see a therapist because he couldn't be gay. You'll hear how he decided to go to Ozark Christian College because he really desired to live his life for God, but he also knew that he would never be able to be fully present or himself in that space. You'll hear how he dated Tori, my wife. That's how we met. How they dated for like almost 2 years. And when it got really serious and everybody thought that they were going to get married, that he had to crush her heart because he knew that there's no way that he could marry her because it was too big a lie to carry. You'll hear how he began to self-medicate with alcohol because he was suppressing so much of himself that he began to hate himself. How that led to a decade-long battle with alcoholism that would take him into some of his darkest and most dangerous days of his life. It's episode number 1. If you can listen to that story and not feel compassion, not feel anything, then you're dead inside. And I don't have anything for you. Feeling to feel allows us to see past all the rhetoric. It allows us to see past doctrines and to see past preconceived notions and to truly see the person. So our second step in how to love is to feel. Let's look at that next verse, verse 34. He went to him, going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he took the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. So the final step in how we love others is to act. Right? It's to act. We actually have to do something about the suffering of others. It's not enough to just see, right? It's not enough to just feel. Seeing and feeling must move us to act. Seeing and feeling, if you stop there, that's like posting on Instagram and thinking you've done something. That's part of something, right? But it can't just be the whole thing. There are a few of you who know the intimate details, the behind the scenes of what happened when we decided to move Shift as a community toward an affirming theology, but most don't. And I'm not going to talk about it this morning to like garner sympathy or to denigrate anybody or to somehow compare our story to our queer sibling stories. They're not the same. It's not on the same level, but it is our story. The handoff from the previous church. For those that don't know, Shift has been in existence since right around 2014. And we stepped in as leadership in the 2020 to 2021 years. And in that existence, it was and I don't mean this in a negative way, it was, a pretty typical evangelical church. And we met at Westwood Middle School. But the handoff from the previous church to who we are now was incredibly messy. Originally, the plan was when the old staff pastor stepped down, that it was going to be about a 5 to 6 month transition process that would allow us behind the scenes to re-register with the state, to kind of switch over all of our online platforms like the website, the giving platforms and stuff, which was crucial, so we could keep paying our bills. And you might ask yourself, well, why would you have to re-register if you're just taking over, right? Like, that doesn't happen. Well, don't forget when we were, right? It was like 2020, 2021. There were tens of thousands of dollars of debt tied to Old Shift, taken on to keep the doors open, just like hundreds of other churches throughout the country during that same time period. So we had to re-register would allow us to create a clean slate. But to have that clean slate, we had to make it, right? Now, if you've ever tried to do anything with the government, it's not straightforward or an easy process, right? Creating the non-for-profit by itself really wasn't that difficult, but all the paperwork on the back end was. And if you know me at all, I hate data entry. It is like, if there is a hell and I'm going there, I'm going to be doing data entry. There's nothing worse. But there's a ton of back end stuff, and we had to get the new EIN number, and you can't create bank accounts, business bank accounts, until you have that number, and you can't create new online platforms unless you have your bank account. You can't get your bank account unless you blah, blah, blah. And it's just this one big thing. And it shouldn't have been an issue, right? Because we had 6 months to do all of this, right? Not a big deal. We got plenty of time. That timeline went from 6 months to 4 weeks, almost overnight. And those were circumstances outside of mine and Tori's control. It was dictated to us for other reasons, and I understand those reasons. But the reality was that the mad dash was on. So 4 weeks. We had 4 weeks. In 4 weeks, we created the new non-for-profit, which was Shift Church, which is technically Shift Community Church, because even if there's an entity that's dead, you can't have the same name in the state of Florida. So we had to change it slightly. We had to create that. The hardest part of that was the initial board of directors, all right? And that was a lot of paperwork, because one of the board of directors lives in Los Angeles and the other one lives in Kansas City. So there was a lot of stuff going back and forth there. But we got it done. We finally got our EIN number from the IRS, created the new website, set up the bank accounts, and then we were able to create the online giving platform. And then there was more of that with the IRS, all while still working other jobs. It was incredibly stressful behind the scenes. My wife did so much stuff that nobody ever saw. But the real stress didn't come until we realized that God was calling us to move toward queer inclusion in the church. And I won't, for the sake of time, I will not go into the years-long process that was. But those were hard conversations with previous staff. people felt hurt and really betrayed. It created rifts in friendships that still haven't healed. And I'm not sure that they will ever be healed, and that deeply hurts my heart. I started getting phone calls and messages from people I haven't heard from in years. Years! All trying to save my soul. If you ever want to learn, if you need help in setting healthy boundaries for yourself, I learned. So I would love to sit down and talk to you about that sometime. We have lost some of the deepest friendships of our lives. There are people that stood next to me on a stage at my wedding that I've known for more than 20 years that stopped talking to us. Zero communication from people that I did life with for a long time. All of our working relationships here in town were cut off. Shortly after we did all of this, there was a gentleman from Oklahoma who had to come to Gainesville for some surgery. I don't even know what it was. And I'm not sure why he emailed us, but he did. He was reaching out to a church, and he was alone and was going to be here for a few weeks, and was like, hey, could somebody come and visit me? Just wanting somebody to come and talk with him. And I knew that there was no way that we or I could fill all of that for 2 or 3 weeks. So I was part of this group chat that had staff from every church in Gainesville that was working together, and there was probably like 30 people in this huge group chat, and we use it to arrange meetups and blah blah blah. So I shot out a message to everybody that just a few months ago I had texted with, and I shot out a message and just told them what was going on. Would anybody be willing to help create a rotation so somebody could go every day? Didn't have to be a staff person, just somebody from your church, right? And guess how many responses I got back? One. I got one response back. It was a thumbs up emoji. It was a thumbs up emoji. So they would have rather let that guy sit there by himself than work with us. A large group of people from Shift left for a few different reasons during that same time period. And I honestly don't think that anyone left with ill intent. I mean, honestly, because I still see people, still friends with those. Everybody, I think, left well. And it just is what it is. For the most part, I think that they left simply because of what the American church has turned into the last line in the sand issue, right, of queer inclusion. And I think most of them just weren't emotionally ready to take that on. We even had one young volunteer whose mom told them that if they stayed, they weren't a real Christian anymore. That mass exodus caused us to almost close the doors. Almost close the doors. I went back into fitness training at the YMCA. My wife, Tori, she picked up some side gigs. The families that stayed stepped up financially and helped keep the doors open during that summer. It was hard. It was a really hard summer, but we made it. We made it through that summer. Then came the hate. I have never been called more names in my life than I have in the last 2 years. I have never been told that I'm going to hell more than I have in the last 2 years. And I think I've mentioned this before, but just be forewarned, you're all going to hell too. And my family is going for some reason.
We'll have fun.
Yes. Yes. If you get there first, save us a room.
Yeah.
All of those things that were said to me, though, were always air quotes, in love. I tell you this in love, brother. Mm-hmm. You should read the comments on some of the stuff that we get. Sometimes I'll engage, but most of the time I won't. Recently, I had to block somebody that I've known for about a decade because they accused me of helping groomers abuse children, and that was the last straw. So they got blocked from everything. Now, if you look at the story of the Samaritan person, he would have known that helping the beaten man came with consequences, right? Because he's Samaritan and the victim is Jewish. He was choosing to incur the wrath of his friends and family for helping somebody that they would refuse to help. And he was potentially, we talked about this last week, he was potentially risking his community by touching what might have been a dead body. But his compassion overrode all of those negative consequences, because doing the right thing isn't always easy, right? It's not always popular, but doing the right thing is never wrong, right? Ted Lasso? How we treat others is the narrow road that leads to life. And for us, it has led to so much life. For every relationship that we've lost, we've been doubly blessed. It was so worth it. If anybody's watching this, it was so worth it, and I would do it 100 more times. I think about our dear friends Debbie and Joey. And I'm not sure how long they've been together, how long they've been married, but it's been a long time. And they are such beautiful people, and we love them deeply. Debbie is just this mom to everybody. Just by nature, she is very nurturing and mothering, right? And she's fierce, but very nurturing. And Joey is just as kind and loving, but she is a spitfire. All right, this woman is a spitfire. She will kick down doors and throat punch if she has to. I would not want to be the kind of person that incurs her wrath. There's Phoenix and Madison, who just got married last month. They are young and in love, and they are such goobers. Phoenix is the more boisterous one, but they both have these like really big personalities. I met them while planning the Pride student meetups that we do here in the city. And they are kind, and they are loving, and they are hardworking, and they are brilliant. There's Tamara and Casey, and many of you know them. Tamara was the first person that I called before we even went public at Shift. And she didn't have to take my call, but she did. And she was the person that allowed us to take our first steps in the shallow end of the pool. She is fierce, and she is inspiring. All of us, board members at the Pride Center, would run through a wall for her because she is that kind of leader. Her wife, Casey, she is more of a man than I will ever be. If you need a project done or something fixed, Casey is one of the first people that I think about. She is strong physically and mentally. She's a hard worker, but don't let all of that fool you, because underneath that like really tough exterior, she's a big softie, and she makes a really mean old-fashioned. There is Sean and Melvin and Dawn and Faith and James and Elena and Patrick and Matt and Kane and Camilo and on and on and on. I could literally take up the rest of the day telling you about all these amazing people and friendships that we've been blessed with. And then there's all of you, right? Whether you're here in person or you're on the stream or you're watching the TikTok live, if our leadership had refused to see, had refused to feel, and refused to act, none of you would be here. None of this would be happening. Think about the hundreds of hours that we have volunteered outside these walls, making the city better. The thousands of dollars given outside these walls to make the city better. Think about the thousands of listeners that are encouraged and challenged every week through our podcast. All these little and huge and amazing things that this little church in Gainesville, Florida gets to do because we saw and we felt and we acted. Acting always comes with unintended consequences. Act anyway. Act anyway. So narrow your focus. Slow down. See the people around you. Allow yourself to feel. Let the seeing help you look past the rhetoric to see the human being so that you can feel, right? That gut reaction must be paired with action, or if it's no use. Let it drive you to do something. Who is your neighbor? Everyone, right? And we love them by seeing, by feeling, and then acting. So if you're new, this is our time of reflection. right? We do this every week. We do that because we want you to pay attention to what your body and your mind are doing right now. What are they saying to you? What is God saying to you? And so what we'll do is we'll turn down the lights and the band will come back up and play, and we do that to help create a physical space for you to listen. And I will ask a few questions to guide that process. And then I'll pray for us all, and we end with communion every week. And for us, communion is a reminder of the things that Jesus taught and did and how he died. We remember resurrection and how that powers us to live as Jesus did. So my first question for you today is this. What did you hear most today? What did you hear most today, and what is God saying to you through that? With so much happening in our world right now, how can you narrow your focus? The third question I have is, which of these three, see, feel, or act, is the most difficult for you? And why do you think that is? My last question is this. How do these three simple things allow us to follow the path of Jesus better? Let's pray. God of compassion, bless us with seeing to see. Help us to see past issues, past talking points, past theologies, and see people. Help us to feel. Break our hearts for the things that break yours. Remind us to not numb our senses, but be fully present. Help us to act. Don't let the enormity of suffering in our world paralyze us. Help us to do for one what we want to do for all. And I thank you for the simplicity of this Good Samaritan story. I thank you for the wisdom and beauty and depth we find. I pray that we all leave feeling encouraged and empowered, knowing that we are partnering with the divine to bring hope and love to those left on the side of the road. And thank you for meeting us when we're in that same spot, just left for dead. I pray that we never take the wide berth. I pray that we always take the risk, regardless of the consequences. And thank you for Jesus. May these small symbols remind us of the way he's called us to live and to love. In your name, amen.